Okay, so welcome to my talk about best development practices for GWT web application. My name is Julien Dramaix. I'm software engineer at RBs. I'm a GWT maintainer and GWT contributor, and I represent RBs at the GWT steering committee. Let's start this presentation by talking a little bit about the motivation of this talk. Why do I create this presentation? I've been working for RBs for 2 years now, and at RBs we try to follow several best practices in our development in order to be able to create quickly big, performant and beautiful GWT application. And we want these applications are maintainable and reach a certain level of quality in the code. And you know, I'm working with on several projects on different clients, and I've noticed that not all the people are aware about or know this best practice. So it's why I created this talk. It's more to share our experience with the community, our experience to develop big GWT application. So this talk will be split in 3 points. We will first talk about some best practice to implement in your GWT code in order to increase a bit the performance of your application. Then we will talk about how to put in place some process in order to improve the maintainability and improve the quality of your application. And then I will end this presentation on the development process that we use at RBs and how we develop quickly beautiful GWT application. So let's start with the GWT best practices. The first best practices is to avoid widgets as much as you can. The main reason is that because widgets are heavy. You know, widgets have been created in the first release of GWT when we had to support all browsers like Internet Explorer 6, Internet Explorer 7 and company. So they comes with certain legacy, and the first problem with the widget is that the HTML produced by the widget are not optimized at all for the new browser. This is what look like the HTML of an application using a lot of widgets. So it's div inside div inside div. You can have some table to do the layout and so on. So the widget will produce a lot of HTML elements, and that means that you will have a lot of HTML elements in the DOM tree. And less elements you have into the DOM tree, more the application will perform. So you have to avoid widget and take control of your HTML. Let's take another example to explain why widgets are heavy. You know, widgets come with a life cycle, and this is a UiBinder template. So I'm using GWT Bootstrap here for the example, and so it's a simple example using I think 16 widgets. But what's happened behind the scene when the UiBinder will inject this code into the DOM? First, the UiBinder will have to create or to instantiate 16 widgets. Then it will start to inject the HTML panel into the DOM. So it will inject the element behind the HTML panel into the DOM, and then it will call the lifecycle of the HTML panel. So it's the unattached method, and in this method, the HTML panel will start to inject their children, its children, sorry, so the row, and so on. So we will create 16 objects. We will call at least 16 methods on each object to attach, to do the logical attachment. So you will have, I will say, 60 or 70 call to the method and so on. So it's something that you have to avoid, and this is the same code, but using HTML directly. So instead of using the widget of the Bootstrap, I just created a Bootstrap resource that include the CSS of the Bootstrap, and then I'm using the class directly to do the layout. But what is the difference here? When the UiBinder will try to inject this code into the DOM, it will just create a big HTML string containing everything there, and then it will just push this code into the DOM tree by passing this HTML string to the browser. And the browser is much more efficient to create all the elements and attach the HTML. So instead of doing 60 operations, like in the case before, you just have one operation in the browser. So maybe with 16 widgets, that will not make a big difference. But if you have a big application and you have several 100, I don't know how many widgets, that will make a big difference to use as much as possible HTML instead of widget. You have to know also that widgets is a JavaScript object wrapping DOM element in order to add some method to manipulate the element or to attach event handler that in order to catch the event that occur on the element. And so you add a kind of layer of JavaScript across all your HTML elements, and it comes with a cost, and often you don't need that. So you say, okay, we have to avoid as much as possible the widget, but how can I attach the event handler to my HTML element? RB is the solution. What we use is GWT.create. GWT.create is the rewriting of jQuery, the JavaScript library, in GWT. So that means that you can use the same code that you use in JavaScript with jQuery, but in your GWT application. So this is just a little example where I have an element, my button, that are defined in a UiBinder template, so I can inject it in my class using the UI field. If I want to listen on the click on this button, I just use the $ method of jQuery to say, okay, on click, call this code. I can also manipulate the element. Here I change the CSS, I set an attribute, and I set the text of my button. And GWT.create is a bit more powerful in the sense that you can make query on the DOM itself. So here I have a table and say, okay, give me all the input of the table and add the class require on all the input of the table. GWT.create is very powerful in to add event handler and also to manipulate any element, because the first goal of GWT.create is really to ease you to do DOM manipulation. So if you have to change something, the API of jQuery is more powerful than the API offering by the widget. If you are more interested by that, Manelo here will give a talk about how to speed up your GWT coding with GWT.create. It's tomorrow in room about here, room 3 at 10 a.m. Okay, but so when to use a widget in your application, because you have some time to use widget. The only valued case why we use widget RBs is really to encapsulate complex component to reuse. So if you have the same complex HTML that you want to use in different places of your application, it's fine to encapsulate that in a widget and reuse it. But you have really tried to minimize the number of widgets that you are using in your code. And yeah, I will talk a little bit about MVP and GoTP in this role. In GoTP, there are the notion of presenter widget. So if we have a complex component to reuse, it's better to create a presenter widget while you will have the MVP pattern inside. I will talk about that later in the talk. And also, you know, the widgets are not, they are still maintained by the GWT team inside, but the GWT team is not improving anymore the widget. Why? Because in the future, web component will replace, it's what I think, so, but the web component will replace the widget. So it's time to use HTML, CSS, because in the future we will do it. Two exceptions. First, the HTML panel is a widget that you can use, because if you want to include the HTML, you need HTML panel. And the cell widget, because the cell widget are very, very, very good widget, in the sense that they are not using widget inside as children. They are just playing with pure HTML. They do the same thing that I was talking before. I created a big string HTML and put the string into the DOM. So they are very performant widget. You can use it without any problem. My second best practice is to embrace browser history, and you have to let the user to use the back button. You know, it's really frustrating for a user to leave your application simply because he wanted to go in the previous screen of your application. He click on the back button, and he leave your application because you don't have an item in the history when the user navigate in your application. Also, in the same ID, you have to let the user refresh the page, and that means, you know, users are eager. If your application take some time to load some data, the first reflex of a user is just to reload the page. And if by reloading the user come back to the initial state of your application, it's very frustrating for him. So what you have to do is, each time that the state of your application change, so because you change of the screen or a pop-up occur or something like that, you have to insert an item in the history of your browser. And you have to put in the history token, or you can use the push state API if you want. It's like you prefer. But you have to put in the URL all the information you need in order to determine the state of your application. So if I take the URL, I copy-paste the same URL in another browser, I should arrive on the same state of the application. I should see the same screen. And a big advice is that you have to implement that at the beginning and not do that at the end of the development process. Otherwise, it's mostly impossible to do. The third best practice is to use an event bus. I think a lot of people know that. It was presented by Ryan in 2009, I think, on Google I/O. So the goal is, yeah, to decouple the code of your application, to decouple the different components of your application, and yeah, to fight spaghetti code. Also, another best practice is to use dependency injection. The big advantage to use dependency injection is mainly for writing your test. We'll come back on the test in this talk. Because if you use dependency injection, you will be able to mock all the dependency of the class you are testing, and so you can focus only on the code of the class you want to test. MVP pattern, yeah, I think it's still a good pattern to use in the GWT application. That can change in the future with framework like Singular and so on. But for the time being, we are using MVP pattern everywhere, and we are really happy with. Okay, I know everybody know the MVP pattern. I will just talk about some best practices for your MVP application. The first is that your presenter will contain your business logic. That means that the presenter will contain all your logic in order that you will be able to test this logic by only testing your presenter and not your view. And in the same idea, your presenter doesn't know anything about DOM element, widget, browser, anywhere. This is the idea also that when you will test your presenter, you will be able to test your presenter in a simple JVM, and you will not be obliged to use the GWT test case. If you create pure JVM test, this is much faster to run. So if you have to to handle with an API that's called JavaScript or something in the browser that should be in the view side. And the same idea, your view must be as dumb as possible. That means if all your business logic is contained in your presenter, that means that your view, you should not have any conditional blocks in your view. If a decision has to be made, it is the role of the presenter to make the decision. If you want something to help you to build your MVP application, at RBS we have a product, GWT, so open source project. It's much more than an MVP framework, and it embraces all the best practice I mentioned in this talk. If you want to know more about that, you have a talk tomorrow at the same time that the talk about GWT.create. We have to make a choice in your presenter. But how to improve the productivity using GWT by Christian Goudreau. Another best practice is to use CSS as much as you can. You can link that with the best practice to avoid widgets, because if you have to make, a lot of people use widget to make the layout of the application, you have to use CSS3 directly. We are in 2015 now. CSS3 is very performant to do the layout, so go there with the CSS3. In the same idea, don't use, if you have some animation to do it, you can do it with CSS3 right now. Yeah, if you, for your CSS, I recommend to use CssResource with GSS. So GSS is a new feature that that has been included in GWT 2. That is available, sorry, in GWT 2.7. GSS is an extension to CSS. It provides more advanced syntax with constant mixing function and so on that will help you to write and maintain your CSS of your application. Also, it's better to, if you already use CssResource, I recommend you to migrate to JSS directly, because it will minify your application better that the existing syntax, the existing parser, that the old parser, sorry. So, for example, Google has already migrated most of the GWT application with GSS, and they noticed that the code size of the application decreased of 1% just by enabling GSS. Yeah. The best practice is prefer JSS file over UiBinder inline style. The idea is if you spread your CSS across multiple files, you will not reuse your style. I mean, you will always create the same style over all your UiBinder template. So it's better to have everything in one or more JSS file. Another best practice also is keep your CSS clean. A lot of people think that the compiler will remove the CSS that is not used by the GWT application. It's not the case. So if you have a big CSS file and you use only one class, your CSS file will go with your application, and the compiler is not able to prune the CSS that it's not used, not yet. We are talking about something to that, but it's not yet implemented. Yeah, another best practice that we use at RBS is to load everything you can in the HTML page. Often the HTML page of your application is mostly just empty. You just have the script tag that include your JavaScript code generated by GWT, but you have nothing in your HTML page. So that means that when your application loads, often the application will make some request to the server to get some data in order to be able, in order to build the first screen. But what not hiding this data directly in your HTML page? Because the HTML page the index.html of your application is coming from the server. So you can make this page dynamic and include all the data you need for at least the first screen inside this HTML. And when the application starts, instead of requesting the server, the application can read the data directly in the HTML page. If you take a look about, for example, the source code of Gmail or Inbox and so on, you will see that the page is very huge. It's the big JavaScript arrays that contain everything the application needs to build the first screen. Another example, for example, is often you need if you have the user have to log in your application. Often you need the information about the user, his name, his first name, last name, I don't know, the email address and so on. You can include that directly inside your HTML page instead of asking to the server, oh, give me the connected user. So the best is to inject static data in JavaScript arrays in your HTML page. And to read this big JavaScript array, we use the Dictionnary class. It's a class included in GWT that allow you to read this kind of JavaScript array. That will minimize the number of requests needed to load the application. That will decrease the time to load your application. Okay, so we've seen the best practice to use when you develop with WIDGETS. Now let's talk about the quality. And the first thing I want to talk is the unit test. If you are using MVP and dependency injection, tests are now easy to write. You have everything you need. You just have to take each presenter and write code to test each protected and public method of your presenter. And as you are using dependency injection, you can mock every dependency used by the presenter and focus on the code of the presenter itself. And also, as you are using MVP, your presenter doesn't know anything about the view, about JavaScript and so on. So you can run your test directly in a pure JVM. So it's much faster than using any GWT test case. This is how we write test RBs, and we are using a special naming convention for each test. We start the name of the test with the name of the method we want to test here on height. Then we explain a bit the context of the change. So I'm testing the onIE method when the fields change. And then we explain briefly the expected result. So here I'm testing the onIE method when field change, and I expect that the field availability change event is fire. Also, we structure our code using the given when 10. That means here we have a block given that explains some context about the test. Then the when block is explain list the action that we are testing, and the 10 it's what we expect as result. So it's easier because I will talk about code review afterward, and if you have always the same structure, if you are using the same naming convention, when we do code review of tests, it's very easy to do. If you are using Mockito and if you are using Gin or Juice, I recommend you to check Jukito. Is the introduction of Juice inside Mockito. So you can use Juice directly in your Mockito test. Let's talk a bit about code review. At RBs, every line of code written by a developer is reviewed by the other developer. And I think it's not only for open source projects. I think even in enterprise we have to do code review. The first reason is that will improve the quality of your code, and you will detect the bug earlier. I mean, imagine one developer changed some code. It can break some part of the application it's not aware of, and if the other developer review the code, maybe they can detect that, okay, you changed that, but I used this functionality in my component, so you will break my component. So you will improve the quality of your application by doing code review, and also it's a way to learn from your peers. That means at Arbis we recommend the junior developer to do the code review of senior developer, because it's a way from them to learn from the senior and become better. And we ask also, we encourage the people to ask questions if they don't understand something in the implementation. We are using web-based code review system. Mainly the most famous is GitHub and Bitbucket. It's cloud-based web-based review system, but you have also, for example, Stash or GWT. GWT for me is the most powerful. It's the system we use for the grid code, but it's a bit more complex. But Stash and GWT, you can install your own server internally. So if you don't like the cloud version, you can use Stash or GWT. Code review best practice. I think these tweets summarize the first best practice in code review. If you have 10 lines of code, you will get 10 issues. If you have 500 lines of code, you will say, okay, it looks fine, just because the people will not review your code. So you have to keep your change as small as possible to improve the code review. If you, I already saw some developer that 2 days before the release, they work 1 month for a release. At 2 days before, they push the code for code review, and you have 100 class change. It's just impossible to review. So, and you are 2 days from the release, so say, okay, go ahead. And so finally, code review is not useful in this case. So we have to do code review more often with small change. You have also, I recommend also to use a style guide, because that will is your code review if all the class have the same structure. If people use the same indentation, you have to avoid that having several new line before the block, and so on. So, and yeah, before to merge, you have to address all comments made by the other developer. Let's go a bit about continuous integration. Yeah, this is some continuous integration server, like Jenkins, TeamCity. I think it's the most famous. We have CloudBees if you need a cloud solution for your continuous integration. The first person to do the code review must be your CI server. That means when you create a code review, the first thing to do, the CI server, is to take the code and try to compile it. And he has also to run the test about that to know if the change will break something in the application, and also check if the style guide if the change doesn't break the style guide also. And also, if your CI server is doing that, it has to somehow post a comment in the pull request itself. That means that if you don't do that, nobody will know that the change will break the application, or the change doesn't compile. You will maybe receive an email, but nobody reads emails from a CI developer, so it's better to have a command. Here is a command on GitHub. So we have our team.ct server, and you say, okay, all is well. The compilation works fine, and all the tests pass. If it's not the case, we have something in red, and with GitHub it's not possible. But with other code review system, you can avoid that the developer is not able to merge the pull request until the compilation success. So it's really nice. Well, I talked about that. We have to enforce the style guide with CHECKSTYLE, because otherwise you can put in place a style guide, but nobody will respect the style guide if you don't configure CHECKSTYLE. Or CHECKSTYLE will just check the style of all the class, and if something is not respecting your style guide, the compilation will fail. And so we come back on the previous slide, and the developer is not able to merge the pull request in the code. Let's finish the presentation by talking about the development process we are using at RBs. You know, often at the beginning of the project, you receive the requirement of the project, and you start to develop the application. And after a few sprints, after a few weeks or months, you have a working application. But you know, we are not designers, we are developers. So often our application is looking like this instead of this. And that means that we have implemented all the requirements, but it's really not beautiful and maybe not user-friendly. I mean, I prefer to use this. That does. We try to avoid that at RBs, and the first person that starts to work on the project is the designer. And the designer will sit with the client of the project manager, and they will talk together, and the designer will create a mock-up for every screen, everything that we have to implement in the application. After that, we have what we call the web integrator. They are HTML and CSS experts, and their goal is to convert the mock-up done by the designer in HTML and CSS. At RBs, we are using GWT, so it's MVP framework with presenter and view, and our web integrator know how to create a presenter or to create a view. The presenter is just empty. The view is using UiBinder, so they know that they take their HTML and put that in a UiBinder template. They know how to create a CSS resource and using JSS to create and maintain the CSS. So that means that when these guys are done with by converting the mockup into HTML and CSS, we have, they build the skeleton of the GWT application, and we have a GWT application that is working. The GWT application does nothing, because the data, that's fake data inside the HTML and so on, but the application is navigable. That means that we can take the application, give the application to the client, and he's able to click on the different arrow, link, and so on, and start to navigate across the different screen of the application. And so it's a way to receive a first feedback from the user and from the client. One is done. The GWT developer, me, enter into the game. And so what we do is simply to implement the presenter. So we just implement the logic, the GWT logic inside the application. So make the request to the server to get the data, build the HTML with the real data instead of using fake data. And that means that the developer focus only on writing Java and GWT code and no more HTML or CSS code. So we start with the designer. We continue with the web integrator. Here, I forgot to push arrow here because there are also a kind of discussion between the designer and the web integrator, because sometimes designer is our dreamer, so they think we can do everything in HTML, CSS. It's not always the case. So sometimes there are big directional discussion between us to be sure that we will be able to implement the mockup done by the designer, and then the GWT developer there. And there are also a discussion between the GWT developer and an interaction between the GWT developer and the web integrator, because often we break the UI, so we have to ask the web integrator to come back and fix things like that. And that works fine. And with this process, we're able to create big, beautiful application very quickly. So that's why I wanted to present that.